Well, hello, my brothers and my sisters. This is your brother from another mother, bringing you the healing and freedom journey. Mark DeJesus here. I'm all about mental, emotional, and relationship health, bringing you insights along the way. If you value those areas, you have arrived at a great place. Speaking of mental health, I address a lot of questions that come in. It is a big part of what I do in my materials and resources. And I got enough questions on this topic and subject. I said, okay, I guess I'll go ahead and provide some feedback. And it has to do with Pastor John MacArthur and him addressing the subject of mental health, specifically the term mental illness, and making the statement there is no such thing as mental illness. He said it on a number of occasions, and then he branched out into a bunch of other areas. There's no such thing as PTSD. There's no such thing as OCD. And so many who heard that part sent it over to Mark DeJesus and said, hey, what's going on here? And I know there are a variety of different streams of the Christian faith that benefit from the materials that I talk about and produce, and it's an honor to be able to do that. As many of you know, in my history and journey, I was raised Pentecostal Assemblies of God, but at the same time, I also attended a independent, fundamental Baptist Christian school. So I got very acquainted with both worlds, and in fact, from there, have gotten acquainted with many different streams in Christianity. Even myself worked at an Assemblies of God church on staff. I also pastored a non-denominational church. I bring up Independent Fundamental Baptist because I'm familiar with one of the big colleges that many of them support and promote, Bob Jones University, and John MacArthur went there for a few years. I don't believe he continued there, and he didn't continue in the IFB pathway. In fact, Independent Fundamental Baptists that I will talk to will say, yeah, we don't really agree with everything with him, but we appreciate his stances in certain areas. But anyway, just to say that I do have a bit of sense of what he talks about a lot and how he comes across. I'll get to that part maybe towards the end. But I want to address this area of mental health because so many people are struggling and battling and are deep within the trenches. And then to hear a statement like this, what do you do with that? And many well-meaning believers who either listen to his teachings or listen to things he say or maybe benefit from his ministry start to scratch their heads and wondering how to face their own struggles and how to face their own battles, how to even look at it when statements like this are said. And I usually don't get into this kind of thing, but when it's brought to me and it hits an area that's very, very important to what I do, and I get enough people that ask about it, I'll respond to it. So what I'm going to do is I'll pull up the video and off of a sermon, although he did mention this kind of perspective in a few other areas. I'll focus in on the message here and walk with you through it and kind of give you some feedback. My goal would be to give you some reasonable perspectives because many times people can make very big magnanimous statements, and it can come from distorted perspectives, and it can also produce distorted perspectives in other people. So without further delay, let me go ahead and bring that up, and I'll give you some feedback on it. The message
about a week or so ago that I was in a panel discussion.
For those of you that are listening, the message titled here is Christ is Sufficient for All Your Crisis. He starts off with the statement that I'm going to get into, and then the second half, he gets into a sermon on this topic in this area. So
a week or so ago that I was in a panel discussion, and it was being videoed, and the question came up about mental illness. And I made the comment, there's no such thing as mental illness.
Now, you can say that kind of statement. That doesn't mean that that's true. I can say there's no such thing as anything. I'm going to need something to back it up. And he's making a very, very, very big statement. He's going to need some stuff to back it up if you're going to make that kind of declaration.
And I was told within a matter of a few hours that blew up the internet. And one of the headlines was doctor and woman preacher take issue with John MacArthur. I don't know about the doctor, but I'm happy to take issue with a woman preacher. That's fine.
You have to understand too that he's somebody who welcomes the fight. I think he thrives off of it. He tends to be fine with being a provocateur. Is that the right word? And making big statements like that. One of them is women preachers. He likes to get out there and fight about it and make very big statements about it. So I may get back to that in a little bit as well too.
But there were lots of other people who weighed in on what a horrendous thing I had just said. And I know it's been circulating out there because people have been asking me about it. An interesting phone call came in. I just heard it this morning from a person who said, I represent the leading psychologist in this country. And also, we manage the largest facility for juveniles who commit adult crimes. And I'm calling the church to let Pastor MacArthur know that everything he said is exactly true.
Now, anyone knows that you can make a statement in perspective and get a doctor to line up with you. Now, he had a very highly influential doctor who's a part of a clinic. Now, what we have to know is what's the point that he's trying to bring home? Just saying it doesn't exist? What are you talking about? Where are you coming from? What are you meaning here? Even on TV, I could make a toothpaste and say I've got doctors that affirm this. This is doctor recommended because I got someone to back me up. When it comes to science, and psychology is the science of observing human behavior. When it comes to that, you can't just have one person say something and all of a sudden it's true. It has to be studied, it has to be observed, it has to be challenged. And that is one of the parts of modern science that is a struggle, even with physical health, is we've gone through this in many different rounds, is how science needs to be challenged. When you make observations and you study something, it needs to have reports given, there needs to be peer review, there's feedback, there's a process going through. And what people need to understand is mental health ties into psychology, and psychology is the study of human thinking and behavior. What you're doing is the science of observing how people think and therefore how they relate to it and how they act in the world around them. So within that, there is aspects of what is called mental illness. Now, that term isn't really used a lot. You might say, I have a mental health battle or mental health struggle I'm having. Basically saying I'm having a struggle with my thoughts and my emotions or how I'm relating to life or what I've been through, and I'm having a hard time coping. And so what we've done is just develop terms, and then out of that, there are documented observations. What we're doing is observing behavior, and psychology collects that and observes it. Now, I'm not here to defend psychology's moral perspectives because much of psychology makes room for God, but it's not founded on biblical things and God's ways. But I do appreciate the observations because you can observe human behavior that has been studied. So therefore, those things go into certain categories, the battlegrounds. And what they look at is certain battlegrounds of thought, emotions, relating, development, so forth, that then are observable and they're outside the norm. And what that can mean often differentiates. Okay, and so it's not healthy to just have one doctor stand out and go, that agrees with me and I'm all set. It's a little bit irresponsible to do that. And he's a gentleman who values the Word of God, does deep dives, deep studies, vast theological resources to pull from and digging into. So we've got to do a bit better job when if you're going to make a huge statement like this, you're going to have to back it up with what you mean by that, and you're going to have to break it down. because we have millions of people on the planet suffering. We gotta call it something. And if you want to argue over what it's called, whatever, but we also need to provide actual evidence of changed lives and people no longer having those battles. And sometimes we spend so much time arguing over what it is, we don't actually help people get free. That's a big part of this journey, is the church or people just in general. They argue so much about what is it that then was like, well, how do you help people? And then we just give backhanded answers, like just read the Bible or just pray more or just do better, and we give backhanded answers that actually don't help people to walk free. Because I know personally, under the direction of multiple church kind of environments where I did not find any help for what I was going through in what is called obsessive compulsive. I'm very, very obsessive compulsive in my upbringing and in many patterns. Many of you know my story and my journey. I'm not bashing the church of that. It's a tricky battleground. But to then say it doesn't exist, that is a heightened level of inflaming someone's sense of mental health distortions. And it's incredibly unhealthy to do that. Anyway, I'm just getting started with this. That's a lot I could say on it. I'm trying to stay focused.
If I made that up or not, you have to trust me. But I was pretty surprised. And they went on to say, if he wants to write a book, we'll supply all the data. There's no such thing as mental illness. That is not a new concept. That goes back to the 1950s. Thomas Szasz, the psychiatrist who wrote the book, The Myth of Mental Illness.
Now, I haven't read that book, so I don't know where the premise is. What do you mean when you say there's no such thing as mental illness? And like I said, that term is not necessarily even used a lot. Oh, you're mentally ill, or I'm mentally ill. It's more like I'm recognizing in my mind, in my emotions, and how I relate to the world around me, I'm having struggles, I'm having problems. And those have been categorized into certain categories that then are looked at as here's what those things usually look like, and here's observable behavior. Because it gets into physiology, and I think there's a bit of a mix-up here and confusion over it.
And that myth has been around for a long time. And it's been just in the last few years that data has come in, and people in the psychiatric and psychological world have admitted that they have been telling noble lies for decades and decades and decades, identifying supposedly mental illness as a way to explain people's odd behavior, difficult behavior. But I'm not saying this. I'm not saying there's no brain disease. There is.
Okay, so now he's going into I'm not saying there's no brain disease. So now he's going into a physiological aspect of science and medicine when it comes to actual organic brain damage, where there's been a measurable damage to the brain. He's trying to take that and he's trying to then line it up and comparing it to what's called mental health or mental illness.
But that's different. That's pathological. That can be objectively identified. Now, I don't want to become clinical here, but I just will say enough to let you see the difference.
He's saying those things can be objectively identified in mental health. And I have over my shoulder and on the shelf there, the Diagnostic Statistic Manual of mental health issues. And that lays out a framework of observable patterns that have been seen over the decades. And so I'll let him keep going.
If you're talking about brain disease, you're talking about several categories. The first would be an infection in the brain. That could be meningitis, which is inflammation of the lining of the brain, or it could be encephalitis, which is the inflammation of the actual brain tissue.
By the way, mental health issues can be, not always, but they can be initiated by infection. In fact, with OCD, they found there's something called PANDA, PANDAS, PANDAS, that is a form of infection that could influence it. So just so you know and understand, it can be a part of it. But he's kind of what he's doing is he's kind of separating out physical health and mental health, being like mental health's not really a thing because it's not something that's measurable, and that's just not. It's just not true.
Those can be discerned. Those can be seen. Those can be understood. They can be objectively identified.
And in the DSM, they're objectively identified, they're seen, they're observed. What he's looking for is you can't see every what's called a mental illness. You can't see it under a microscope or a brain scan, so to speak. I'll get into that in just a second.
The second category next to infections that fits into the zone of brain disease would be seizures. Seizures because something is wrong, like maybe epilepsy or some other form of seizure. Something is wrong with the electrical system. The current system is misfiring. The third possibility of real brain disease is tumors and masses. We all know about that. They can be discerned. They can be seen in a CAT scan or in an MRI, sometimes in an...
And by the way, it's mental health battlegrounds. When you look at brain development and you look at the mind and the health of the brain, you can see it in MRIs. Sorry, I'm having trouble with my audio. You can see it in MRIs. I even just read an article, research work that's been done where they're studying teenagers and brain development and the impact of social media, because they're noticing this arc where there is this dip in certain aspects of brain development. And when they look at it through MRIs, or there's other things, like you've heard of Dr. Amen, he can do brain scans and things like that. What they look at is areas that are stimulated under certain circumstances. And under that, they can begin to look and go, okay, there's activity that's here. But just because somebody has a certain pattern of thinking, it doesn't mean, automatically there is some organic thing in the brain as far as the physical makeup that has been damaged. That's not true when it comes to mental health. And people, if they're communicating only that, they're communicating some deception. I'll get to the deception part that he's trying to bring out. He just doesn't do a good job of addressing it.
X-ray or certainly in surgical procedure. And the fourth sort of large category of brain disease would be trauma, like a concussion or some accident or some injury to the brain that takes a toll on the brain's ability to function because part of the brain is disconnected.
There's a lot of research that's showing that head injuries can be a big influential part to not only mental health, but actually physical health. There's a thing called the blood-brain barrier that's a protective mechanism that the body has. And when you have a massive head injury, it can really shock that and mess with that. And it's a very, very influential factor on somebody's overall health to just make note of that.
Taken into disuse. The birth defects could lead to that as well. But all of that can be understood and seen by objective testing.
Yeah, and so what do you mean by objective testing? So let me just try to break it down a little bit simpler. He's trying to give these are the only things. If we're going to talk about the mind, then let's talk about the brain. There is a difference between disease, there's a difference between disorder, and what's called syndrome. There are many diseases where you can see the organic impact of what's happening there, of what's happening to the body in some kind of way, and you can understand the etiology, like source of it. Then there are certain disorders. So what I would say to Pastor MacArthur, of all the kids that are on the autism spectrum, you can't find that in a blood test, a brain scan, or saliva test, some kind of other test. It's only seen, observed. An autism spectrum disorder, okay, that's why it's called a disorder. It's something that's actually observable and measurable, but there are many theories as to what's going on. I have my own opinions on it, but Pastor John, would you dismiss autism? There's no such thing as autism, because autism spectrum disorder is there. I know that Pastor MacArthur stands up for gender and the whole gender battle and God created male and female, and there's a battleground within it. It's in the manual of gender dysphoria, of having a body dysmorphia, is the terminology. Is there no such thing as that too? But I know where he's going with it, and I'll get to that in a second to try to bring some clarity.
That is not the case with mental illness. Mental illness is a term
that's not really used.
Is really not identifiable by any objective means. You can't see it.
It's not true. Yes, you can see it. You can see it and observe it. You spend time with somebody and you can see how they think, feel, and behave. And that's what psychological observations do. Mental health is supposed to do, is show the patterns, observations. Here's what that's most likely under the umbrella of, and here are some ways to help it. Now, how to help it has some things that we could certainly debate over.
MRI or an X-ray or a CAT scan or surgery. You can do brain surgery and you're not going to see schizophrenia. So this is a misnomer.
When I listen to him talk about this, I just ask myself the question, how many people with really bad, okay, there's no such thing as mental illness, whatever you call it, someone who has what's called schizophrenia and the paranoia, have you ever actually worked with somebody in it? Have you actually been with them and walked them through freedom? Have you ever actually been with somebody that has massive, what's called bipolar mood swings? I have people whose families have been like torn apart when somebody gets into that manic swing and the damage that it does to relatives, or somebody's in a delusional state, or in what's called OCD and spinning out. Maybe many people have actually spun out with some of the teachings you had about salvation and being sure you're saved. And many people have written to me about spinning out about it, and they're trying to navigate and work through. Have you ever, my question really is, have you ever worked with somebody? Because sometimes we can get into these places of position and authority that we can just kind of make blanket statements, but we've lost touch with being with people in a day-to-day life. And many pastors, in my opinion, don't have like real day-to-day life interaction with people and really being connected to actually what they're wrestling with and what they're actually struggling with. He's kind of, it comes across like he's talking from this perch down to people that are suffering, saying, hey, we're suffering. That's not what it is.
And I went on to say in that panel discussion, there's no such thing as OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder. There's no such thing as ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. There's no such thing as bipolar disorder, where you're low and high, and somehow this is something that's embedded in the brain.
Okay, that it being embedded in the brain kind of statement, that's something that could be debated, but it's a pattern. It's a pattern. You can say all you want, OCD doesn't exist, but you need to get around them, and you'll see there's a pattern that they exhibit. People with bipolar, and the example that he uses, yeah, it's observable. And being embedded in the brain, what does that mean? What does that mean? For him, it's like, oh, it's embedded in the brain and you can measure it.
There's no such thing as
I'll get to that more.
PTSD, post-traumatic stress.
Now, have you ever sat down with somebody who has been sexually abused, Pastor John, and has had to work through the nightmare of it? Somebody who's lost a loved one, who's been physically abused, emotionally abused, in a chronic state of neglect. Have you ever been in that and heard the horror of it and the difficulty and challenge of it? Again, we can say something doesn't exist. What you've now done is you've damaged unnecessarily, damaging people who are just suffering, and try to make sense of what you're going to. And now you distance yourself from helping them. Because now what you've done is you've dismissed yourself from a large percentage of the population battling these kind of things. In fact, PTSD, many soldiers suffered for decades with no recognition of it. Mass rates of alcoholism, suicide, self-harm, rage and anger issues that was never, ever identified. So, speaking of the military, I think I read that John MacArthur is like some distant relative to General MacArthur. I think he's like a fifth cousin or something like that. Maybe that's coming through, just that military aspect. Because back then in the military, they was it General Patton? He was one of the big ones that would just dismiss, people who were having very, very severe symptoms coming out of what was initially called shell shock. And so, again, observable, documented patterns that have been seen over and over and over and over again.
Disorder. This is not to say that people don't have problems.
This is where it gets into, it's kind of an old school pattern of being very, very simplistic and then dismissive. When we don't try to understand what a generation of people is going through, it could be very easy, especially if we don't have connection to it in our own life or have gone through in our own life, we'd be very simplistic. It's not to say people have problems, right? Simplify it down to just like one word and then be dismissive of it. It's very irresponsible to do that with people that are battling and struggling. Sit down with them, talk with them, take intake, take a journey. I'm not saying you have to call it mental illness. I don't know that people, I don't even know any of my videos go, hey, let me teach you about mental illness. It's more like the managing and the growth and healing through and developing who we are relationally. And John MacArthur has a mind, he has emotions, and he can dismiss the need to tend to emotions. However, he has them. And he would say, don't follow your emotions, which I understand what he's saying. However, he lives off of emotions because thoughts don't exist without emotions. We have emotional connections to our thoughts and then how we relate to them. Now, reading his background, and I've heard little stories here and there. He grew up in a home and was raised in a home with parents and so forth. He'll get into that in just a little bit. And a lot of the mental health breakdown that we see is relational breakdown. And it comes from what we were raised in, what we were not raised in, that many people are trying to heal from. So anyways, this simplistic and then dismissing. Make it very, very simple and then very dismissive. What you've now done is this is not a guy you go to with your problems anyway, but now he's distanced himself even more. And why would we want to do that? Why would we want to distance ourselves from people who are suffering? Call it whatever you want. We can argue over what the terms are, but what we need to do is we need to be like Christ and be amongst people and love them and find how they can learn to see God for who he truly is and take in the word of God and disciple people in ways that are bringing about life change to how they think and their problems.
It is to say they have problems, but they're not connected to some mental deficiency.
So he's attaching mental illness. That means that something physiological that can be measured is automatically deficient. Okay. Now, what I want to get into for a moment is to explain some of where I believe he's coming from. Is the modern day connection with here's a diagnosis of what you have and that is treatable. And the implication of that is then medication. And there's two problems that I believe need to be addressed in this. Is over pathologizing our problems, like kind of putting a name and a thing to everything that we have. That is a problem. But just because there's a problem doesn't mean we still need to serve and help the battleground. Two, there's the issue of overprescribing, prescription pharmaceuticals for psychiatric medication. Yes, we're just like, here's the thing, here's the medication. And so there is a problem, and I did a whole talk on the Christian and medication. You can go check that out. I'll link to it in the show notes. There is a problem with that. And I shared with you my stance and perspective in actually working with people, not just standing at a pulpit, giving my opinion and reading the news or reading an article and actually working with people, as well as doing due diligence and reading the research and patterns. But there is, because pharmaceutical companies, and what he's brought about is in the past decade or so, there's been an awareness to this. Pharmaceutical companies hijacked this concept of what was called a chemical imbalance. And there were theories of it, and it's still theories, that they would utilize serotonin, norepinephrine, dopamine, these things. This medication is going to help target that. And it's not necessarily true. It's more of a theory. It's not like they can go into your brain and measure serotonin, but they know serotonin is a part of a calming, kind of peaceful state when that's flourishing in a healthy way. They know a bit about norepinephrine. They know a bit about dopamine, even though we're still on a long trajectory of understanding. There's this connection, because what he's doing is he's talking about illness from a place of it has to be something that's measurable in like a blood test, or measurable in some kind of thing that you can actually study chemically. And that's just not true. There's diseases like syndromes and illnesses that are measurable. Like, for example, John MacArthur would probably say there's no such thing as chronic fatigue syndrome. It's a syndrome. The etiology is unknown, but they see over and over again a certain pattern of absolute exhaustion, and sleep and rest doesn't make it any better. And difficulty just have energy just to get up and get through the day. But they observe this enough in enough people to go, okay, there's a collection of this going on. And they call that a syndrome, or they may call it a disorder. So to make a statement like this, there's a lot of battles that, what are we going to do? Say, well, that just doesn't even exist. Okay, here's what's going on. Then what? It adds a lot of pain and confusion. But anyways, he's making that connection that has been made that I don't think is healthy. Hey, you have this, it's treatable. And when many in mental health arenas mean treatable, there's a big implication of is with psychiatric medication. I'm not against it, but I'm very, very soberly cautious about how much we jump to that. I have seen where medication can be helpful to bring some stabilization, because I've seen when someone's been off of it. And I like to encourage, get some stability so that then you can do the work. It's not, oh, I'm on this and everything's better. It's fine. Most psychiatric medications anyway, most, not all, I'm trying not to do the blanket statement here, really bring about a dulling kind of effect. And most people who have had anxiety medication or depression medications have gone, they've experienced that. They may not feel anxious anymore, but they don't feel a lot of other things as well too, because that's kind of what they do. And pharmaceutical companies are not honest about that. And I know that brings up a whole kind of pathway we could get into, and I don't want to re-talk the whole medication thing.
Even schizophrenia, which is a pretty severe word, and it means, generally speaking, somebody who loses the ability to distinguish between reality and fantasy. And reading
it's not fantasy, it's more like delusion of reality. Not to nitpick, but he's a nitpicker. So I'm just like, you're nitpicky with your theology, and then you talk about this and you just kind of throw out statements. What I would like to know is, let's put a schizophrenic who wants help in your office and go. What are you going to do with him or her? How are you going to help that? Very, very challenging. He's talking about a very, very challenging battleground. I've seen it. I've rolled up my sleeves with it. I have watched the toll it takes on people, on their families. I've watched what helps. I've watched what doesn't help. These kind of reactions don't help.
About that a little bit this week. I read that a particular article that I was looking at from a high level said, schizophrenia is permanent. You have it your entire life.
Okay, I won't join you on that basis. The people that say that, I don't come from that premise that any battle that you're facing is necessarily permanent. And I believe that we always need to have hope for things to improve and that God can grow us. I always want to leave that possibility open in my life. However, I encourage people to walk a journey and take a journey because working through our mental health battles is multifaceted. So anyway.
Now, this is pretty much typical of the other disorders as well.
So why not say to people, if you have a mental health battleground, it doesn't mean it's permanent. There's hope in Christ that you can experience change and freedom. Why not do that? I don't understand, because he has grace in his ministry title. The number one thing we should all be experiencing is the essence of grace off of what you're sharing, of what you're saying here. And what we're getting is just kind of statements that aren't explained and backhanded responses.
If this is something that your brain is doing to you, then you're not responsible for it.
No, I don't agree with that either. And that's whoever's teaching that, if somebody's teaching you, this is just your brain and we're not going to do any work. If you have any mental health struggle and you go, this is just your brain and you're not responsible for it, you don't have to, that's unhealthy. That would be irresponsible. I don't know who you're hearing that from. I hear it said in certain ways where it's like where it's like, this doesn't say anything less about you. It doesn't mean you're weak. I think those kind of statements, I've talked about that in my video on, we have a poor relationship with weakness. That what's wrong with saying, hey, I'm weak in this area and I'm working through it. Recognizing you have a battle does not take responsibility off of our lives to pursue healing, growth, and change. I am responsible for how I think. I am responsible for how I respond to my thoughts. No one else is responsible for me. I'm responsible for the decisions and choices I make and my decision to grow and heal. So he's using these areas in mental health that can be debated by us as Christians especially, and using them as a basis to stand on.
You understand that? That's very important to understand. Now, am I saying that there's no such thing as obsessive compulsive behavior? No. There is obsessive compulsive behavior. Am I saying there's no such thing as attention deficit hyperactivity? No, there is.
So I think what we're getting into now is he's arguing over terminology. And I think this is a waste of time. It really is. It's a waste of time and it's damaging to people. Because you just in one sense said there's no such thing as mental illness. Is there OCD like things? Yeah. Is there? And then he's going to get into the ADHD thing, which that could be debated, certainly.
Such a thing. I possessed it as a kid. I am a living illustration.
Okay. So he had it, but it doesn't exist. But he's going to talk about what was helpful to him.
You can recover. You can recover, and you can recover without medication. There were two things that every teacher I ever had said to my mother. Johnny doesn't pay attention, and he never sits still. That is attention deficit hyperactivity. That had nothing to do with something permanent existing in the fog of my brain.
Anyone who teaches that a mental health battle is permanent, don't listen to them. So that's what he's pulling from. Don't listen to them. That's just a permanent way. And ADHD is an area that should be debated on and should be looked at. We're over-prescribing kids. We're prescribing them very quickly. We're jumping to that. We're not making an emphasis, because in my reading and research, I am not seeing enough emphasis on parents. I'm also not seeing enough emphasis on fathers. There is very little Very little. There's a lot of research evidence of the power of fathers, but not a lot of emphasis on the power of a father. He mentions his mom, but having a mother and father work with you, because I see patterns of what could be called ADHD in myself, my wife, both my children. I don't necessarily just throw that label on them and ship them off, but working with them where they're, my kids, where they're hyperactive, working with them where they struggle with focus. That is helped through nurture. It's work. And I won't get into all the details, but both my kids have had their struggles with learning, and I've had to sit down with them for hours and hours working with them, because I take my role as a parent seriously in that way, in working through the areas where they struggle with, but finding their passion to utilize their energy. I guess I should probably do a whole talk on ADHD, but I don't want to shame people that are like, yeah, I've had to work through it. I've talked about a lot of things that cause what we're calling. And again, Pastor John, they're just calling something a term that then is a bunch of behaviors. I am with him when it comes to the overt, now we're just throwing people to a medication and this thing is permanent, and it doesn't even match the science of neuroplasticity, the body's ability to develop new connections and form new patterns. I'm living evidence of that. I'm living evidence that I have newer ways of thinking and relating, but it came out of work. And many people recognize in their upbringing, they don't have the parenting, they don't have the support that is there. Many are brokenhearted and traumatized and neglected. So they have this empty place. They went into self-survival modes, so they don't know how. And what we need discipleship. And discipleship is done relationally. It's not just done in a class. Here's your 10 theological things you need to memorize so you can win an argument. No, here's how to relate to God, having conversations, opening up the word, working with people. That's the way discipleship is meant to be done. And unfortunately, we're not doing that. So then people are often going to a therapist's office to work through many things that actually could be worked on in discipleship, in mentoring. That's a whole subject in itself.
I'm not saying there's no such thing as post-traumatic stress.
But you did.
There is post-traumatic stress. You go to a battle, you lose the 3 guys around you, you walk away, you got survivor guilt, you've got profound grief because your friends you were so deeply invested in and battling for survival. You've got deep pain, you hurt, you're suffering, you're grieving. That's a very real thing. Is it a mental disorder? No, it's life. It's life.
That's the dismissal. That's just dismissal. How is that edifying? How is that grace to you? How is that seasoned with salt? How is that helping somebody? If anyone comes up to you and says, I have this thing I'm going through, call it what you want, and just go, that's life. How is that grace? How is that Christ Jesus? How is that in any way the fruit of the Spirit? And this is my frustration with modern preachers and even preachers in history, is you can make a point, but the key as shepherds is how we deliver what we're delivering. And I think we need to be held more accountable to the fruit of the Spirit, because a lot of times we come with these big statements, these heavy-handed things. It's easy to say that when you're standing at a microphone with a bunch of people. It gets a reaction. People are like, ooh, got him. It's life, which is it's true in the sense of life is hard. And I think we all need to recognize that in our life and in our journey. But to take a soldier's PTSD and go, that's life, that is a massive get over it signal. It's a massive shame. And unfortunately, he communicates a lot with shame. And when you do that and you judge and condemn somebody, you no longer position yourself to help them. And I think when we're judging people harshly like that, we distance ourselves from actually helping them. PTSD is helped through grieving, but there's layers and aspects that need to be worked through. And my question to him is, have you sat down with a soldier who had all those things in their life, and because of sitting down with you on a regular basis, is now free and doing wonderfully? Do you have a collection of people that you could bring? Because what you're going to need is you're going to need to do some better research, some more broad. And I know you're at the end of your ministry. He's at the last stages of his life. But if you're going to make these kind of statements, you need to back it up with that, and back it up with fruit of people that you've helped. Because you can't just condemn something and not provide a solution, a workable solution that is biblically based, that manifests truth and freedom for people's lives. Otherwise, we're just leaving people hanging.
This is life. People have grief. Life is very difficult.
I agree with you. Life is very, very difficult. All the more, we need people who are moved with compassion, as Jesus was when he looked at the crowds. Moved with compassion.
It's hard. It's hard. The United States government has a particular website talking about these mental health issues. And my favorite line is a banner that's across the website. It says this: mental disorders are not caused by character flaws. Oh, what are they caused by? If they're not caused by character flaws, that's a dead giveaway.
I do push back against mental health kind of communication. It says mental health doesn't mean you're weak. It's like, why do we keep saying that? What's wrong with admitting I'm weak in this area, therefore I need to dig deep, connect with God, get in his word, do some learning, get some help in this area. I recognized in my life when it came to anxiousness, it came to obsessiveness, when it came to being very guilt prone and performance driven, perfectionist, all those kinds of terms that just identify the battleground. That's all they do, is identify the struggle of what it is, of going, okay, I need to find help. I need to work on these. And these are weak areas in my life. Now, the argument of it doesn't mean a character thing. I think that's another one that's just getting lost in the weeds. I don't know why they make that statement. But there is a facet of mental health arenas that's like, oh, this is just something that's happening and there's nothing you can do about it. I don't align myself with that. I don't encourage Christians to align myself with that. Now, when we talk about character, Pastor John, how do you measure character? Well, a big aspect of measuring character is the fruit of the Spirit. And love, joy, peace, long-suffering, gentleness. Having, are you being gentle and meek? Are you connecting to compassionate love for actual battles? Because on one hand, you said it didn't exist. And then on the other hand, you said, well, it's there. But it's not. You're creating added confusion in people's lives. No, there's something there, and what they're needing is they're needing help. And they're going to therapists because, unfortunately, they're not finding the church wanting to even admit it or talk about it, and then the church gets mad that they're going out and seeing therapists.
These kinds of things we're talking about are the result of people's inability to cope with life. Life is hard. Life is challenging. That's
a blanket statement. This stuff is multifaceted. Be cautious of people that have blanket statements for getting to the why and reason why people struggle. There's layers of stuff. Sin and brokenness is so complex in the layers of what it does. The good news is that the gospel and the grace of Jesus Christ, grace and love is simple. And say the journey is easy, but it goes back to simplicity. And anyway.
Life is disappointing. There's lots of disillusion. There's lots of pain, lots of suffering, lots of abuse. We all understand that.
No, we don't. We really, really don't. And this message communicates you don't. You don't really understand it. Because if you dug into it, it would probably give you nightmares at night. It would probably have, there are pastors who've dug into this, and they have traumatic manifestations and symptoms after dealing with it over and over and again. It will profoundly change your life when you actually witness and walk with the battles and struggles that people have.
How you deal with that is critical if you're going to live out your life. You've got to figure out how to live life. If somebody says to you, it's not your problem, it has nothing to do with the flaw in your character, this is something that you are born with, and it's a disorder, and you're going to have it all your life, and since it's there and you can't really do anything to eliminate it, we're going to put you on these drugs.
That's not necessarily what is always being communicated. Again, he does very simplistic things, backhanded kind of stuff. You're going to have this forever. It's not a character. He's finding some of the flawed statements that are there. Character is a multifaceted issue, right? Character is how I live my life, the fruit of the Spirit in my life, how I am relationally, my value system of morality and so forth. Anyway, not to get lost on a tangent, but the simple things backhanded over and over again. This is life. Life's tough. You got to figure it out. If your parent said that to you, it would be really difficult. If your teacher said that to you, when your pastor says that to you, and you're battling with it, now what do? So people in his congregation are either going to have to go somewhere else, or I'll tell you what a lot of them do. They hide it. And I've watched this over and over again because I got weary of giving messages in churches and seminars and conferences and being pulled into the side corner for an elder, a deacon, or a pastor on staff sharing with me the battle that they have, but they're whispering it to me in a corner. That's what you'll end up with.
And they roll out 15 different psychotropic drugs.
Yeah, and 15 psychotropic drugs. Yeah, that's not good. And we do live in a culture that jumps to a pill-like solution, whether it's an actual pill or a pill like we want a quick fix. And there are many quick fix hustlers in the body of Christ, like pray this prayer, do this thing, or you get the get over it message.
To mask the reality that you can't deal with life and create more problems so that you eventually can wind up on Skid Row under a bridge living in half a tent.
Yes, which many of the people in Skid Row living under a bridge, under a tent, it's an addiction issue. It's not necessarily a homeless issue. It's an addiction issue, and it's a mental health issue. And it is, he needs to spend some time watching interviews with people that have actually gone through horrific upbringing and are living in those kind of situations. We have to actually teach people, he says, masking your problems. We have to actually teach people, how do you begin to see your problems in a renewed way? And this is not just done in sermons. The majority of this is done in families, in homes, and in one-on-one settings.
This is being done to children, and it's criminal. It's criminal.
And I hear you in this. I hear you in this, like prescribing kids too early. Their brains aren't even developed. The teenagers' brains aren't even developed. You know, the Adderall prescriptions, the putting them on anxiety medication so young and so early when their chemical makeup and their neurological framing is not even being fully formed yet. It's still adapting. It's still changing. And however, there's a problem here. There's a battle our kids are facing, and we need to walk alongside them. In fact, I think a lot of families need to kind of back off on all the things we're involved in, scale down a bit, because our kids just need time with us and relational time to talk things through, because we're inundated with so many battles and stuff and our screens and social media. We have access to so much that we have to be more on guard in our families and our homes.
Now, I understand. We have a generation of people who can't cope with life.
It's not just this generation. Sir, I beg to differ. Now, you come from what's called the silent generation, just before the baby boomer generation, which produced some of the most massive manifestations of what we call narcissism. But let's just use some of the other terms and battles of alcoholism, downright abuse, and downright emotional neglect of chronic epidemic levels. Okay, so if we want to talk about generations, we could talk about your generation and what your generation is manifesting. I think he was born in the late 30s, right? So he's just on the cusp of the generation before the boomers.
I understand why. Absent fathers.
Yes, absolutely. We can't just mention that statement and move on. What do we got to do to equip our men to be abled in their hearts and in their leadership in their homes to lead their families? We got to start pouring into that.
Devastated marriages.
Yep.
Absent mothers.
And that's all in documentation that you can read in research of how that impacts people.
No family support. High rate of divorce. Abuse. Disappointment. Lack of love.
That all contributes to what we're calling mental health struggles.
All kinds of things. And particularly the breakdown of the family, because the family is where you learn how to live life. It's where you watch people suffer.
And the number one thing I hear from people as far as living life is, how do I do that? And some of you may not even believe some of the most simple things that people will ask, how do I do that? We're just telling them, read the Bible. And they don't know how to read the Bible. They read it and they don't get it. They tell them to pray. They don't know how to pray. And they're trying, they're frustrated.
And handle it. It's where if you can't get it from your mom and dad, you find your way to grandma's house.
That's a nice picture you paint, brother. Ooh, that's really, really nice. Most people don't have a relationship with their grandparents, let alone their own parents. You painted a beautiful picture of where we should be. How many of you have a fantastic nurturing relationship with your grandparents? Okay. I never connected with mine. One of my grandfathers committed suicide when my dad was 12. My mom's father died when she was 12 of pneumonia, had massive anxiety struggles. So no grandparents to run to there. Grandmothers lived far away. My one grandma spoke Spanish, so I never was able to actually have a sentence interaction with her. And the other was Norwegian, and they don't talk much. So there was any connection there. Yes, you're bringing up something, but you're being simplistic about it. We live in an epidemic of the breakdown of the home. And mental health is relational health. It's a struggle of people and where they come from. And what you're talking about is someone who grew up in I don't know what kind of home you grew up in, but you're talking from that reference. You could go to grandma's. You had connection to those things. Be very sober that you don't recognize the blessing of that, and you're talking down to other people who haven't had that. And now they're trying to recover and relate to a God who loves them, but then we have preachers that are just backhanding them with condemnation all the time, distorting their view of God.
Because she knows, and you lean on her wisdom. But where you have a society that don't have those kinds of resources, don't have those families to turn to, you're going to have more dysfunctional people. I was thinking.
Hello, of course. I've even talked in my trauma discussion about the studies where people have watched tribes and where there's been a traumatic experience that happened, but they would gather. I think it was a story in Ethiopia or somewhere. I forget. I mentioned it in my trauma talk, where he brought out how fascinating it was. They had no mental health teaching awareness, but each day they would gather for coffee for quite a bit of time, and they would bond and share stories and comfort each other and connect. And it helped the symptoms of what they experienced to go through their bodies, because we're meant to be relational. And that's where all these struggles he's talking about come from, is our relationship pain, our relationship heartache. So telling them it's not there and then just simplistically dismissing it, how is that helping serve and minister to people?
Thinking about it the other day as I was watching these ridiculous university students rioting and burning things down. And I was waiting for a psychiatrist to come on television and say, oh, wait a minute, you have to understand. They have rebellion, hostility, violence, hate disorder.
That's not a thing. He's just making a joke. He's just being funny. And he does that. It's a common thing that he does, makes a joke. And it's a thing that many people do, like in the political arena, when people argue and debate in the political arena. And he's been somebody that's been on TV. He's been on Larry King, or he makes appearances on people's podcasts or whatever, and has done those kind of like statements that you can, kind of get a laugh out of people. But first of all, there's no such thing as what you just said. And no one's saying that those people that are rioting and doing those things is problematic, and many discerning people are going, these people need families and homes. They need relationships. They need relationship restoration in their life. That's what we're supposed to be, Pastor John, as the body of Christ. We're the solution to it.
It's not their fault. It's not their fault.
The fault discussion, it's not even that's another thing. He's bringing out all the flaws and using that as the main message of mental health.
It's not a character flaw. This is a disorder. Why don't they say that? I mean, it's one thing to irritate a teacher, something else to burn the school down. Right? Why do you label somebody who irritates a teacher because he can't pay attention, and you don't have a category for somebody who burns the school down?
He's saying if you have a category of something somebody struggles with, then it's just not their responsibility. That is not, and no one should be making that equation.
I mean, if you're going to blame everything on some mental disorder, you might as well blame the really serious things on that. But there's so much fraud in all of this. I understand. Life is hard. Life is tough. And you need help. We all need help. We needed our moms when we were young, when we were little kids.
So what if you didn't have a mom? Or what if your mom came home drunk every night? Or what if your mom punched you? What if your mom screamed and yelled at you every day? What if your mom packed her bags and left and never even said goodbye?
You had children. When your 3-year-old mouths off and talks back to you and takes a whack at mom, you don't say, he's got a MW disorder, a mom whacking disorder.
It's him being funny again, trying to be.
What? If the kid who can't keep his attention has a disorder, what about the kid who's bored stiff and sits in the corner and never says anything? Is that a disorder? And what's a disorder and what isn't a disorder? It's all about mechanisms to learn the skill of living life. There was a time when people turned to pastors and the church and religion, and now the new religion is psychology and psychiatry. You turn to them, and they don't have any answer because they don't even understand that the problem is not physiological.
Mental health is not saying the problem is some physiological thing. It's observable thinking and relating, and how people approach their thought patterns. So people stop going to their pastors. Now, if you run a business and people just stop buying your product, don't you at some point go, hey, what's going on? I know that as believers, we're not in business. I'm just using the analogy. I think the church needs a little self-awareness, don't we? But why are people doing that? Because maybe they're not getting it here amongst us, because the body of Christ in the 1900s went very corporate and went for the big churches like his. He's not in touch with shepherding the people in that building. No way. Now, some may say he's shepherding through his teaching. He's a teaching shepherd. Okay, I get that. I get that in that way. But what we need is people actually who are actual pastoring, who are shepherding people and bringing that help. But there should be a little self-awareness here of, why are people no longer coming us to these issues? And he's not doing a self-analysis in a healthy way.
It's not a disease. They don't even understand that. And when they give those drugs to people, those drugs are not like insulin. Insulin is desired to deal with diabetes. It does so directly. When you take drugs for whatever your disorder is, that doesn't attack the disorder. That attacks you and creates another disorder. The inability to cope with life now because you're living in some kind of altered state. It's horrendous what's happening to children whose lives are, in some cases, destroyed, and very often suicidal tendencies overwhelm them and they actually take their own lives. All the drugs don't help people face life. Life is hard. You have to have answers. I understand fear, a lot of things to be afraid of. A lot. I understand depression. You can get tired of being mistreated, misjudged, unloved. That can get old. You can be tired of being disillusioned, disappointed. You can be weary of the grief that you have to bear or the struggle of caring for others who don't care for you. There's plenty of abuse out there, plenty of anger. That is life.
That is life.
The question is, how do you handle that? By taking some drug that alters your state of consciousness and does nothing for your supposed disorder, which is some life sentence?
Yeah, the jumping to a drug and jumping to this is a life sentence. I'd push back at. This is probably something that maybe you want to present to the psychiatric community or find a forum to do that. But see in that room right there? At least a third of the people in that room are battling something that you described today. At least. That's a low number. How did they begin working through it? Because you just told them it doesn't exist. The medication route, we can talk about that and get some sensible direction in that. But how are you gonna help them? How did those people get help with it?
So I would say, I think it's important for people who have these kinds of problems, and we all do, to talk to somebody else, right?
Just not me, he's saying.
We need help. We need moms and dads and brothers and sisters.
Yeah, no kidding.
Grandmas and grandpas and friends and mentors and teachers and counselors.
Yeah, and people don't have them, and they're trying to find help, and they're trying to find direction.
And everybody who can kind of teach us how to develop skills to live life. And the young generation coming along should expect the older generation to teach them that.
Right. They should expect that. And what if it's not? The body of Christ is meant to be brothers and sisters, fathers and mothers in a spiritual way to help to be a bridge to that.
We've got a young generation that obviously haven't been taught anything about life.
Always, can I give just a piece of feedback to older generation? When you just backhand the younger generation, which is a common thing. It's a common thing to get frustrated with the younger generation. When you do that, you don't help them. We need people to think differently, that have compassion and grace to you. This is supposed to be, I'm supposed to listen to this message and walk away going, man, I got a lot of grace in my life. I feel empowered for overcoming and healing.
They're just violent and angry. So what is the solution? The solution is to recognize that you don't have a mental illness. You have a problem with, are you ready for this? Here's a word my mother said to me very often: self-control.
Which is something the Bible talks about. It's in the fruit of the Spirit. It's also, God's not giving you a spirit of fear, but of power, love, and a sound mind. It can also mean self-control. It's an aspect of that. It's one aspect of it. And those who work through addictions, especially obsessive compulsiveness, they need to learn how to activate self-control, but they need to do that in a place of love, in a place of understanding the love and care that God has for them. And one of the primary root areas that influences mental health breakdown is a disconnect to love, disconnect to God's love, disconnect to love from other people. So, but he keeps going back to this permanent thing that you have. Now, I'm going to make a guess into his theology. He doesn't believe in healing. He doesn't believe in physical healing. So he has a mindset of, if you have a physical disease, you can never be healed. That's permanent. So I think that's influencing this framework that he's created, which is like, well, mental health, you have this forever. Because I think probably in his theology, if it's a disease, well, you just have it. And I'm a person that believes in stretching that. God, I want to believe that all things are possible and that I can change. I can experience healing in physical ailments, in the aspects of emotions, aspects of thinking, that I can grow in that. Faith, hope, and love, increasing in those areas. Just a side thought, by the way.
Get a grip on your life.
There we go, guys. Get a grip. You know, I get countless letters and emails, and they wrote to me, Mark, I want you to know that my life's been changed because somebody yelled at me and told me to get a grip. And here I am today. I'm free now.
To survive, you have to find some skills for dealing with the things that go wrong.
Go find it. You got to go find it. Go figure it out.
How do you do that? Well, you could go to a counselor, and you might be helped by somebody who could teach you skills about how to cope with life. But ultimately, no earthly counselor, not even the best, not even your parents, can deliver you from the most profound fear, which you have all your life long. And the Bible says it's the fear of what? Death.
I don't understand that. I don't understand that point, because the apostles lived in such a way that the fear of death didn't follow them. But anyways, I don't know why he's bringing this point up, why he's narrowing down fear to the fear of death. There's all kinds of fears and all kinds of things. Why he does a lot of like simplistic makes everything like, this is this. So how do we do it? And then he kind of says some things, but he doesn't really say how. He just says, you got to go. It's like, you need to know how to ride a bike. How do I ride a bike? Well, you got to go get someone to help you ride a bike. Okay, so you got to go do it.
I want to know, who can deliver me from the fear of death? That's the issue. No counselor, no drug. There is one who can.
Okay, so if you have a battle, guys, you just need to get delivered from the fear of death. That's the thing you need to do. That's it.
All of that to say, open your Bible to John 13.
So here's the interesting thing and I want to close with this,
and I'm going to try to throw this at you.
Because he then just goes into a message that he goes into talking about how Jesus, you can go watch it for yourself. Christ is sufficient for all your crisis if you want to. It's interesting because they close the comment section, which that's interesting too. But he goes in and talking about how Jesus how he loved so deeply and showed his love that he humbled himself and washed the disciples' feet. I find that so ironic with what I just heard. This is the misuse. This is the confusion. These are the kind of wrong patterns that we get into that damage people. It gets like, speaking of mental, it gets like abusive to the mind to sit here and do that rant and just go figure it out. Now, let me get into scripture. And he goes into talking about Jesus humbling himself and loving his disciples to that point. Is that what we just got? Did we just see? It's just mind-blowing to me that we heard the opposite, and then he goes into a whole aspect of love and compassion and what that love meant. And he talks about the fruit of the Spirit and all those aspects of it. And like, meanwhile, people are suffering and we're fighting over what to call it. Now, I have, like I said, we got to, yes, we can talk about prescription drugs. We can talk about those factors. We can talk about some of the things mental health says. That's like, no, we agree with that. However, to deny that the problem is even there, it's doing a disservice. Was this helpful for your life and your journey? I know I took some time there, over an hour, just addressing a 20-minute talk, but I know many of you are battling and you're struggling, and do my best to just provide some helpful feedback that has been helpful for me, life-changing for me, and I wouldn't be where I am today without understanding some aspects of this journey that I love sharing with you all. Do me a favor, click the like button and subscribe. You can go over to markdejesus.com. If you feel like, hey, the stuff you're saying is helping me, it's a benefit, go over to markdejesus.com. All kinds of stuff there, topics, books, it's a community I've formed. You can support these videos as well too. I thought about doing this in my Sunday live, but I knew it would take some extra time, so I did it in a video by itself. My lighting is, the glory of God is hitting me. So I pray this is a blessing to your life and journey. This is your brother from another mother saying, Lord willing, and the creek don't rise. I'll be back with more insights for your healing and freedom journey. But in the meantime, I'm out.